Several years ago, as I was preparing to do a performance of the complete first book of Preludes by Claude Debussy, I encountered a series of paintings by Italian artists who created watercolor impressions of each of the preludes from this set. I immediately contacted the artist, and his son, who happened to be a concert pianist, responded to me. His father, unfortunately, had had a stroke and passed away. The pianist was kind enough to share with me the slides of his father's paintings, which I showed in my performances. The response from the audience was staggering. Many compliments came from the fact that the paintings seemed to have added a unique dimension to their perception of the music. What seems ethereal became tangible, and what, to many untrained ears, seems abstract became clear. So today, I would like to explore the relationship between George Crumb's A Little Sweet for Christmas, AD 1979, and Giotto di Bondone's Nativity frescoes, which inspired this wondrous set of pieces. For the purpose of this presentation, my discussion will focus on the two movements directly inspired by Giotto's frescoes, the Visitation and Adoration of the Magi, with a few short remarks about the other movements. I would like to point out that the process of inspiration is not quite the same, since in the Debussy preludes I mentioned earlier, it is the music that inspired the paintings, while on the other hand, it is the frescoes of Giotto which serve as the inspiration for Crumb's suite. Nonetheless, it is this, the relationship of the visual art and music, that is of utmost interest to me with regards to this presentation. I would like to make a disclaimer that deciphering the relationship of a piece of music and the painting or artwork that inspired it could be quite problematic and speculative. Nevertheless, drawing some conclusions by examining both music and painting could give the performer and the audience a fresh perspective, add dimension to the musical experience, and in the end, give a deeper understanding of the music at hand. George Crumb composed A Little Sweet for Christmas in 1979. It was written for pianist Lambert Orkis, who premiered it at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. in December 1980. The suite contains 7 movements: the Visitation, Berceuse to the Infant Jesu, the Shepherd's Noel, Adoration of the Magi, Nativity Dance, Canticle of the Holy Night, and Carol of the Bells. The suite has an arch-like structure which reaches its peak in movement number 5, Nativity Dance. While it may sound odd to unfamiliar ears as a whole, the piece is quite wondrous and captivating. And not unlike the works of the great classical masters such as Beethoven and Brahms, the piece uses very few themes and motifs that are continually transformed throughout, giving it coherence, conciseness, and a cyclical quality. Like many of the piano works of George Crumb, the suite uses techniques, extended techniques. But in contrast to many of the composer's more extravagant works, such as Makrokosmos Book 1 and 2, the Gnomic Variations, and the Eine kleine Mitternacht music, the use of the inside of the piano in A Little Sweet for Christmas is quite modest. The use of harmonics, muting, and plucking strings, glissandos, and sustaining pedal are meant to highlight the main aim of the music, that is, to convey the temporal and the divine. Painted in the early years of the 14th century, Giotto's 38 frescoes occupied the interior of the Arena Chapel in Padua, Italy. The frescoes portray scenes from the life of Christ and his mother, the Virgin Mary. As I mentioned earlier, only 2 of the movements in Crumb's suite are actually based on fresco panels. Movement number 1, the Visitation, and movement number 4, Adoration of the Magi. The other movements are related only to the Christmas motif that surrounds the entire set. In an interview, George Crumb revealed that he was given a beautiful little book of reproductions of frescoes by Giotto, and these little prints became the inspiration for the suite. In many ways, Giotto's frescoes are one of the first works to show what are regarded as divine figures in their temporal and earthly manifestations as human beings. Whereas medieval art are formulaic and often unemotional, the characters in Giotto's paintings appear in natural settings such as a manger, mountain, and fields. The frescoes are also imbued with animals, trees, and even a blazing star. In contrast, medieval artworks tended to have gold backgrounds to suggest something ethereal and otherworldly. We can therefore conclude that Giotto's frescoes are transitionary work from the medieval to the Renaissance. Music historian Michael D. Grace wrote, and I quote, "Giotto is often credited for his innovation in the subtle expression of human feelings that are suggested by the way the figures are painted, from their facial expression and from the way their bodies often incline or appear to move toward one another," end quote. It is this subtle expression of human feelings that resonate much in the music of George Crumb. The composer called special attention to the childlike, nearly innocent style that lives in the paintings. The first movement is derived from Giotto's The Visitation. It is based on the story of Mary's visit to her cousin Elizabeth from the Gospel of St. Luke. This familiar story recounts how Mary, after being told by the angel Gabriel that she was going to have a child, visited her cousin Elizabeth, who was also pregnant with John the Baptist. And it is at this meeting that Mary declared her Magnificat, her song of praise to God for having chosen her as the mother of the Savior, which has been the source of much music since the early days of Christianity. Giotto's paintings show the two main figures embracing each other, with Elizabeth in the center of the panel. She is slightly bent as if in humility, in contrast to the upright position of Mary. This seems to reflect the text of the Bible where Elizabeth poses a question, "And how has it happened to me that the mother of my Lord would come to me?" Luke chapter 1, verse 43. Elizabeth's countenance shows her admiration and perhaps awe of Mary's presence. The subtle movements of the two figures suggest a realistic depiction of the natural movement of the human body that foreshadows the High Renaissance. A Little Suite for Christmas opens with a series of block whole-tone chords, clusters played by both hands. The dynamics range from pianissimo to forte and then going back to pianissimo. Michael Grace points out that, quote, "The top notes of these chords suggest plain chant intonation centered on one pitch with only occasional movements to neighboring tones for musical punctuation," end quote. He further suggests that, and I quote, "The elliptical dynamic shaping gives the passage an almost speech-like quality that seems to express in music the beseeching look and posture of Elizabeth," end quote. This opening passage is followed by what William Bland describes in his published program notes for the suite as, quote, "clangorously celebratory chiming figure, which can be taken as a joyous announcement of the upcoming arrival of Christ." The middle section opens with a series of percussive chords in the very low register of the piano, played as harmonics. The chords, while clearly rhythmic and distinct, sounds hollow. The booming low sounds combined with almost supernatural high sounds created by the harmonics paint a picture of the temporal and yet divine origin of Mary and Elizabeth's pregnancies. This could also very well be a suggestion of John the Baptist's response from within Elizabeth's womb. Luke chapter 1 verse 44 records Elizabeth's words, "For behold, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby leaped in my womb for joy." The intermediary theme, mostly in the upper register of the piano, provides a mysterious and marvelous contrast. Again, while the focus of the panel is the earthly and temporal meeting between Elizabeth and Mary, the divine providence and the birth of the Son of God undergirds the entire event. The two earlier motifs in reverse order then return to close out the movements, creating a formal balance in this movement that is akin to the formal balance expressed in Giotto's painting. The other movement in the suite that is directly related to Giotto's paintings is the fourth movement, Adoration of the Magi. The story comes from the second chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew, which tells the story of Magi coming from the east in search of the King of the Jews. In this panel, three Magi pay homage to Christ. There is a gentle yet wondrous expression in the face of the Magi, in contrast to the almost stoic and accepting facial expression of Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus. The lapis lazuli blue skies is striking as a backdraft for a blazing comet instead of a traditional star. The inclusion of a stable, camels, and a camel boy creates an earthly scene, even with the heavenly and supernatural nature of the event. According to Michael Grace, and I quote, "The pentatonicism suggests the exotic origin of the visitors, while the hypomixolydian mode suggests a medieval or Gregorian mood. The exotic effect is enhanced by muting the strings with the edge of the pianist's hand. The aura of these strange Eastern astrologers is most effectively expressed in this delicate music." End quote. This theme is followed by music that can be described as timbral anomaly, in which the pianist plays pizzicato, a melodic arch of simultaneously sounded minor ninths. The higher notes of the ninths are harmonics achieved by touching notes for the second partial. Again, the imagery is unmistakable, supernatural, depicting the Magi's attraction to the divine Son of God as they pay homage to the baby in gifts and supplication. The theme that follows is subtle, arch-like shape, punctuated with pizzicato played on the strings with the left hand. Could suggest the long journey that the Magi had taken, with its ebbs and flows and very distant and soft dynamics. The imagery paints the ups and downs of the voyage these wise men had taken in order to find the prophesied child. The opening theme then returns, this time brilliantly exuberant. Michael Grace writes, quote, "Even apart from the programmatic interpretation, the music of the entire movement, with its unusual timbres, seems to capture the exotic scene most effectively. The composer's nearly minimalistic resources complement Giotto's very human scene." End quote. More so, the suggestion of the temporal and the divine is ever present in Crumb's music, just as it is present in the frescoes of Giotto. The other five movements of the suite are related only to the Nativity story, but do not correspond to any of the frescoes by Giotto. In movement number 2, Versus to the Infant Jesu, Crumb expresses the rocking quality of the lullaby by using a simple left-hand ostinato. This accompaniment undergirds a gentle melody. This is a stunning passage, simple, effective, and evocative of the innocence of a newborn baby. Movement number 3, the Shepherd's Noel, depicts the wonderment of the shepherds as well as the braying of the sheep. The canon-like middle section is in fast figures, repeated notes, and grace note passages describe musically the ovine antics of Giotto's sheep. Movement number 5, Nativity Dance, cannot be related to any of the frescoes in the nativity scenes, but more of a general feeling of exuberance and joy at the birth of Jesus Christ. The opening whole tone chords of the first movement is transformed into a trumpet-like fanfare marked with fortissimo sforzando. The pianist is directed to depress silently and secure the dampers with a sostenuto pedal, adding a reverb effect, a sort of divine halo to the joyous occasion. Movement number 6, Canticle of the Holy Night, uses the inside of the piano quite extensively. In addition to securing a group of notes with the sostenuto pedal, the pianist must be able to do some very extensive acrobatics with precise plucking of the strings, glissandos, and pedal control in order to play the quotation of the familiar Coventry Carol. While Crumb makes no mention of any direct connection to any of Giotto's panel, the inclusion of the Coventry Carol and the subtle yet disturbing quality of the music seems to suggest an indirect reference to the event of the massacre of the innocents as described in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 2, verse 16 to 18. A close examination of the text of the Coventry Carol reveals this connection. This poor youngling of whom we do sing, bye bye, lulai, lulai. Herod the king is in his raging, charge he hath this day. His men of might in his own sight, all children young to slay. Movement number 7, Carol of the Bells, is filled with exuberance and overwhelming joy. Crumb even directs the player to produce metallic quasi-glockenspiel sound to express the ringing of the bells, a fanfare for the arrival of the king. The movement also recounts the bell-like melody from the first movement, as if to remind the listeners of the nucleus of this entire suite, the coming of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. The restatement of this theme gives the piece a cyclical quality, symmetry, and formal balance. Michael Grace aptly describes that, quote, in the works of Giotto and Crumb, there is a striking impulse to find new ways to communicate human feeling in art, end quote. Along with other works such as Black Angels from 1970, Dream Sequence from 1976, Zeitgeist from 1988, and his recent set of 10 pieces called Metamorphoses, Book 1 from 2017. A Little Sweet for Christmas reveals the composer's sensitivity to visual inspiration. For that reason, it is not improbable to conclude that there is much correlation between Giotto's nativity frescoes and Crumb's A Little Sweet for Christmas. Both works deal with expressing the ephemeral into something tangible and the divine into something earthly and temporal.